Hey everyone, and welcome back to Top M&A Entrepreneurs. Now, if you own a business, have you ever felt stuck in the business like you were treading water? Maybe hit a plateau, million, $2 million, and the competition feels insurmountable? Well, today we're diving into a bold strategy. Buying a bigger competitor. Yeah, you heard that right. Acquiring a larger rival can be a game changer. In this interview with Greg Moran, we'll explore how this approach helped his software business flip the tables from being acquired to acquiring a competitor 5 times his size. Let's get into the video. Welcome to the show, Greg. How are you?
Good to see you, John. Glad to be here.
Well, Greg, I just got to mention this. I went back to your LinkedIn and I looked on your site. We both went to the University of Plattsburgh in the 90s.
It's good to see Plattsburgh State graduates floating around doing something these days.
It was a little too cold. I remember in one December, never got above freezing any time of the month.
No, that was fairly routine in Plattsburgh, New York. Great school, great place. It's changed a lot, I think, since we've been there. But it was not known for its weather.
It is cold. I don't know how the Continental Army did it back in the 1700s, man. It's freaking cold. Anyway, so welcome to the show. We're here to talk about your journey, your acquisitions, and can you tell us where you start off and just tell us how this started going? You made 12 acquisitions, or dozens at least.
Yeah. I mean, we never, so last company, we never started out, I think, like a lot of the way that M&A ends up working, right? We never really started out as like thinking we're going to grow by acquisition. Just a little bit of context. So the company that we started originally started the company back in 2008, called Chequed, CHEQUED.com. And eventually we rebranded that company as Outmatch. And now the company is called Harvard. It's been rebranded again as it's gone through multiple iterations of the business. When we started we were commercializing technology around human HR applications, right? So we were helping large companies basically select and hire talent. Excuse me. And we got going with this business. And, it was never, like I said, we never really said we're going to grow this thing by acquisition. But it ended up happening like that because, I think what you find is occasionally you find industries where you have a lot of really old school players that were good companies that, the technology had shifted out from under them and they really needed to pivot. And that was a lot of our competitors. So as we started, but they were bigger companies. And, so as we started growing that company, originally Chequed, we were growing fine organically. We were growing at, probably 100, 200% a year in the very early years. But a lot of our competitors that we were going head to head with they had just old school products, and that's who we were displacing. So as we started to grow, we started to look at these companies and say, hey, it would be kind of interesting. I mean, our value, because we were a SaaS, a more modern SaaS player, our enterprise value was derived from our recurring revenue. And a lot of these companies were service-based models. So, we started to look at it and say, geez, it would be really interesting if we could buy some of these companies, acquire them. There's a huge arbitrage in enterprise value that we can get because we're valued on recurring revenue as a SaaS model. They're services businesses and they're being valued at 1x. And so we started looking at this and saying this could be an interesting thing. And I think we did our first acquisition in that business before we hit $1 million in revenue. We had a competitor that was out there and they were struggling to really find their way in the market, but they had some good customers. And we went to them and said, good enterprise size customers. And we went to them and said, hey, if you want to do something, we'd be interested in acquiring you. We were able to acquire for like 1.5 times revenue or something like that. And again, it made sense. They weren't, they're maybe $500,000 in revenue. It cost us a ton of money. We were able to roll them in. We did that like the first time and then we migrated their clients onto our platform and said, hey, like there's actually something here. We started to do a little bit more of that. And then we ended up getting to this point where we had this opportunity. We had a larger competitor. At this point, we were probably 2 million in revenue, in recurring revenue. We had a much larger competitor come to us and try to acquire us. And it didn't make any, they were growing at like 10% a year, service model. We were growing about 100% a year. And they kept trying to acquire us because they wanted to modernize the business. It didn't make any sense, right? From a financial perspective from them. And I had a board member who has grown a very large company and done a bunch of M&A. And I'll never forget this. One day we're sitting in a board meeting and I'm saying, hey, this company called Assess Systems, they keep coming to us and trying to acquire us. And board member's name is Martin Babinek. Martin is the founder of a company called Trinet, who is now publicly traded, New York Stock Exchange. And Martin said, well, why don't we buy them? Assess was doing like almost 10 million in revenue, and we were doing 2. I said, Martin, that's not a thing. Like, how are we going to buy it? And he said, well, look, let's at least float it. Let's see what happens, right? And he said, we can figure out a way. Let's just us do the same thing that they're asking us to do. I said, all right, well, I'll talk to the CEO. And I developed a good relationship with him and said, hey, here's an oddball idea. Would you think about us acquiring you? And he said, how are you going to pay for this? And of course, I had absolutely no idea how we're going to pay for this. And I said, no. I said, well, we've got the financial backing. We'll figure out how to do it. And, just think about whether it makes sense. And probably a week later, he calls me back and said, yeah, we'd be interested.
Pretty easy.
Yeah. And, it was kind of like one of those sort of the dog caught the car moment. It was like, okay, Martin, that was a great idea. Now what do you want to do? And, it was really this pretty funny thing. And I had exited another business. And one of the things that ended up occurring when I exited this previous business was I had become good friends with one of the unsuccessful bidders for that company. And who was in the private equity world out in Silicon Valley. And I called this guy, Eric, and he was a partner in a large private equity firm. I said, Eric, I've got this really bizarre situation. I said, I don't know if you would be interested in taking a look at this or not. I said, but, we want to go and we want to buy this company that's about 5 times our size and 4 times our size, 5 times our size. And we want to put these things together. We're going to modernize the business. We're going to, bring the companies together. We're going to do all the stuff, and we're going to have a much larger platform to grow from. And Eric said, it actually sounds interesting. He said, can you come out to Palo Alto and we'll talk about it. He said, come out in the next couple of days. And I said, okay. End up sitting there, and he said, walking through the whole thing, he said, yeah, we'll do the deal. And sure enough, we go from thinking this is completely impossible to now we have the target committed and we have the funding. And ultimately, we ended up closing that transaction.
So he ran the numbers and say, we can do this. We've got the money. We can raise it. And
yeah. And I think part of this is because I had developed this relationship over a long time, over a period of time with Eric. So it wasn't like this call. The call on this situation was out of the blue, but the relationship wasn't out. And so this is a relationship that had gone back a bit. We had been looking kind of for a deal to do together, and, if it made sense, we would figure out a way to do it. They actually wanted to fund Shack at the time, but we were too small. They're a bigger PE. There were a lot of things that lined up in our favor, but what went from seemingly impossible to, we're doing this transaction, it felt like it was overnight, and suddenly we're this, group of 15 people building this company. And we go close this transaction, and now we're 60 people. We go from 2 million to 10 million or 12 million in revenue with a stroke of a pen. And now we're bringing these companies together and trying to integrate these businesses. It ended up being like the beginning of, this. That's where we rebranded the company from Checked to Outmatch and started really doing a lot of heavy M&A at that point, because we were
Well,
sold.
hey,
on
this is
this
a lot
model.
faster growth this way.
Well, and I think there's a lot of parts to this, right, John? I think, when you look at it, there's just a lot of industries, a lot of businesses that are selling into certain industries. They're never going to be the 100, 200, 300% growers over the long term, right? But they can be solid 20, 30% organic growers where that additional 10, 20, 30% of inorganic that you can bolt on there makes a really huge difference. And that's kind of the way we started to look at it. It's, look, we're going to grow this thing in a sustainable way organically. We're not going to go burn a bunch of cash. We're going to operate this thing. We're going to take our organic growth. We're going to put it back into, we're going to take our profit, put it back into growth organically. We're going to supplement that growth inorganically. So we're just really going to be able to, and that kind of provides that compound leverage to really grow. And that's what we ended up doing. And it worked out well.
Let me ask you what happened post-mortem 1 year later. You absorb a company 5 times your size.
Mm-hmm.
How did it work out? Was there everything work out as like you wanted, or were there definitely some road bumps along the way?
I think road bumps would be the understatement of the century. Every once in a while when you drive down the road and like you hit a pothole and you're like, it's not a normal pothole. You feel like your tires
that hit the frame.
That's more like what we were hitting periodically. I mean, look, culturally, these businesses were extremely different from each other. You had a business, you had Jack, who's a company I started that at this point had been around for like 3 years, really modern technology, really sort of innovative, aggressive culture. And you had another, in the company we just acquired, not only were they 5 times our size, they'd been around for like 30 years. They were growing and satisfied with, maybe 5% growth annually. It was very much, one of the things that they prided themselves on was they hadn't had turnover in the company in like 2 years.
Wow. That's kind of a nice selling point.
Yeah, it's nice. And again, I'm not saying any of this stuff from a judgmental standpoint, but very, very different cultures, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Silicon Valley, 30-year-old company, 2 different things.
So, when we did this acquisition, I became the CEO of the combined company. And you can imagine what the 60 people inside that company thought of us, right? I mean, this was culturally, to bring these companies together was brutal. It was really hard. I mean, there were longstanding customer relationships that all needed to be shored up. There was a culture that needed to try to get unified into becoming one business. There were speed bumps all over the place that we were hitting, and it took a while. I would say it probably took us a good couple of years to really get it to the point where we could operate this thing as one unified company and really started to really grow together, not as different businesses.
Was the exercise worth it? The energy, everything at the end result?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I wouldn't do, there are tactics I would do differently. Strategically, what we ended up doing was we got this small company doing a couple million in revenue to within, now you fast forward out, you go out about 4 years, we now were one of the top 2 or 3 leaders in our industry globally.
Yeah.
And it ended up positioning us to be able to then go sell the combined company, now at that point called it Outmatch, to a very large private equity firm, and do a successful transaction. Now that company today, now called Harbor, like I said, rebranded a couple of times along the way, has we ended up doing probably another 6 or 7 acquisitions, and that company today is one of the largest players in its space globally. So none of that stuff would have been possible without adding that M&A as a really strategic growth lever into the mix. So no question, it was an extraordinary experience for everybody involved in it. It really was. And
I have to ask you about the CEO. Did you ever have a cocktail later and go, "Hey, what made you change your mind and sell to us?"
Well, they had been at it for a while. We became good friends, and they had been at it for a while, and I think, sometimes you just get lucky with the timing on things, right?
Mhm.
They had a VC that had been involved for a number of years. That VC was pushing hard for growth. And by us hitting them, the reason that they were trying to acquire us is because they couldn't really figure out how to grow organically at all. I think we provided. I'm not sure that had we agreed to be acquired by them, they would have really known what to do with the business. And I think they knew that. It just made sense. I think we just kind of got them at the right time where their VC firm had been in for a number of years. I think they were 5, 6, 7 years in, something like that at that point. They weren't seeing the growth. This thing was not really materializing, and we just got lucky.
Got lucky. They have to go get the permission from the VC, who's going to either veto it or go, "Hey, man, we need an exit, or this is going to be written off." Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And they probably made a couple, 2 extra money or something like that. And look, when you're going from a position where you're like, I don't even know if there's a path to get myself to 1x. Like now I'm on the investor side today, and I run a venture capital firm, venture capital fund, and I see things like this all the time. It's like sometimes you jump for joy for the 1.5 or 2x, right? When you think you're
especially if you have a few years of frustration of no growth. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. You're sitting there, you're like starting to think, this thing is like a straight line to zero for me.
I can't figure it out. Yeah,
right. Those that quick, that 1.5 that like gets my cash out of here, and I'm not taking a full write off. That's great.
Yeah, I got to return those funds to the investors, so it's not my money.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. We just the timing was right. I think for everybody, and it worked out great.
Yeah. So what did you do after that? Did you take 100% buyout from this private equity firm, or was it a kind of a 30% rollover? I'll stay on for another 2 years, or
when we ultimately sold?
Yeah.
So I stayed on. I stayed on for about 18 months as the CEO. So the funny part of the story, John, is we completed the transaction with the private equity firm when we sold Outmatch. We completed the transaction on February 28th of 2020. Do you remember February 28th, 2020?
Yeah, the government shut us down.
So we had a couple hundred people based in Dallas where we were based. And
your timing is impeccable.
The funny part is we incorporated Checked, the original company, on the day that Lehman went under. Literally, no joke. So we're raising money for Check the day that Lehman went under. Now we sell the day that the world shuts down because of the pandemic. So it was a few days later, actually. So we end up we closed the transaction on the 28th. That was a Friday. On Monday, it was like the 3rd or something. We have a couple hundred people in Dallas. Just ironically, I live in Colorado. The private equity firm that acquired us, called Rubicon Technology Partners, they're based in Boulder. Pure coincidence. It was a highly competitive process. They just ended up being physically close to me. So Monday, we all fly down. Me and the guys from Rubicon all fly down, and we're going to do this like happy hour and party and announce the acquisition, all the stuff to all of our team in Dallas. And we have a big sushi lunch in Dallas. Like we have this sushi happy hour, tons of sushi and stuff, right? This is like Mark's third. So we go down and everybody's in there eating sushi, and we have this big party and all the stuff. And of course, pandemic's kind of looming out there. I fly home with the guys back to Denver with the guys from Rubicon. And we had a bunch of sushi left over. We stuck all the sushi in we had these big industrial kitchens and stuff, and stuck all the sushi in the refrigerators. Nobody went back. We shut the office down 2 days later. Nobody went back. And in July, I went back to the office for the first time. I was the only one in there, and all the sushi was left over.
Oh my God, was that stinky or what?
Yeah, it was nasty. I mean, it's like 3-month-old sushi, right? But it shows you like how quick this all happened. So that was in in 2020, and I ended up staying on as the CEO for about 18 months. We did about 6 more, 5, 6, something like that, acquisitions in that 18 months, and then I left to start our venture fund called Evergreen Mountain Equity Partners. I left there in October of 22 to go start that, but it was a wild ride, and all during COVID, we did 6 acquisitions or 5 acquisitions, 6 acquisitions. One of them, 2 of them were in Europe. One of them I'd never met the founder because you couldn't travel. The final one we did, we acquired a company called Harvard, which is ultimately what we rebranded into. That company was based in Amsterdam. I was traveling between Denver, Colorado, where I live, and Amsterdam about every week on planes, trying to do the integration of that company. I was flying back and forth about every week or every other week with like 4 people on a plane because I had a waiver from the Dutch government to travel there, and nobody else could. It was the most surreal experience ever.
Out of curiosity's sakes, how was it integrating a international company to a United States company?
Hard.
I've lived in Europe.
Yeah.
My dad was in the Air Force, so I lived in Europe. The cultural, there's differences, and you just got to respect those. Yeah.
Fully. We had acquired that business. I'm trying to remember it was like April 22, something like that. And, integrating a Dutch company into a U.S. company was a challenge. There's just different work styles and things like that. It worked out great, and the team is phenomenal. I ended up, though, there's always a trust issue, right? It's like, we're the Americans, we're here to save you. It's not, I ended up actually moving there for a period of, for a fairly extended period of time, because we just had to build this common trust. And we, again, had to go back to like we did at Assess. And so much of M&A just comes down to building a unified culture and getting people to trust each other, right? And not operate as 2 different companies. And ended up, trying to do this while traveling during the pandemic was ridiculous. So I ended up just moving there. And that, I think, ultimately helped a lot. But without that trust would have never been established in the same way. It was hard. It is hard enough. Integrating companies is brutally difficult. Integrating cultures is the hardest part of that. And then integrating cultures cross-border like that is even harder.
Even harder. So these funds that you started after you left the company, now, what are they? What's the purpose? What's the buy box and the hypothesis?
Yeah, so Evergreen Mountain's a thesis-driven fund. My background has always been around broadly HR, future of work technology, and it's a thesis-driven fund completely focused on future of work technologies on a global level. So there are 4 sort of main areas that we invest around. It's kind of 4 pillars of where we invest: AI and its impact on the workforce, automation of work, globalization and mobilization of talent, upskilling, reskilling talent, things like that, and the freelance and gig economy. We invest around that core thesis: seed, early Series A investing, post revenue. These are post revenue, but typically, under, call it, 2 to 3 million in ARR businesses. And, the big area where we really differentiate is, we've been operators in that space. We can go in, we can make a material impact on these businesses from a strategic standpoint. We understand M&A, we understand that, the lever. We've got a strategic partner network that we can tie into, that not only de-risks on the product market fit standpoint, but can also potentially be buyers themselves and things like that. So it's, but again, all of that is really enabled through, because it is a thesis-driven fund. The other big area that we, because my partner and I, and the fund are founders, we are, a lot of firms talk about being founder friendly. We are obsessed around really making sure that we've got the right founder fit. And we actually we're about to release our own sort of we've got a proprietary founder assessment that we use where we bring kind of science and objectivity into that, into founder selection, which we really believe is as important, if not more important than you want to select the right business, but we can have the right business with a great idea. But if we don't have the right founder, who can execute, none of it means anything.
Yeah. I am really curious about the goodness of the innovation and destruction of AI and what it's doing, and how do you place a bet on something that's going to be dead and replaced at such a rapid pace? I mean, it's like today, if I date this, May 16th, like they just released ChatGPT 4.0 days ago, and the stuff that it can do, amazing. Again.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we're investing around the sort of the changing work environment, the disruption to work, right? So we're really looking at we're investing around technologies that are actually going to disrupt the workforce. Doesn't make you the best attendee at a cocktail party, by the way. Because a lot of the technologies that we're investing in some ways, they're going to put people out of work. In other ways, they're going to augment work in a completely different way, where the skills required and the competencies required to succeed in a job are going to fundamentally change. So you look at we've got a company in our portfolio today that's using AI to help predict workplace safety. So really interesting thing. It's a wearable device. Company's called Spacebands. It's a wearable device. You can wear it in a high risk environment. So construction, manufacturing, logistics, distribution, things like that. Basically collects a lot of data, provides warnings to workers to say, hey, you're too close to this machinery, or you're not trained on this, you're too close, things like that. So it's providing warnings to workers if they're getting themselves into a dangerous situation. But also what all that data does is it helps predict workplace safety, to help retrain workers to have a safer work environment and things like that. So it's a very practical application of AI and data, and how to, again, in that area, how to keep workers safe, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that we're investing in. We're not investing in the next Chat GPT or something like that, but we're investing in the application of that technology to the workforce. How do you make work easier? How do you make it more effective? How do you make people more productive?
Let me ask you about the exit in mind. What do you like this HR and workplace safety? How do you set that? You got to turn your money, or you need a return on the investors. It used to be, just 2009. A lot of people were just thinking about IPO, NASDAQ, but they don't do that as much as anymore, because it's more about, there's a lot of private equity money. It's just a lot easier access to instead of going through all those $1 million legalities that you got to do.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't even think about the M&A, we don't even think about the IPO markets.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I mean, if we have one that IPOs, great, that would be terrific. We don't count on that at all. If we're looking at it from a IRR standpoint within our fund, we're looking at it, from how do we help this company get to a strategic exit, get to an exit with a strategic buyer, or how do we, help them move into higher levels of private equity to grow the business larger and larger. I mean, you can build an enormously valuable private company today that can churn, remarkable returns without ever touching the IPO markets. Or ideally strategic exit, right? And, because we are investing at an early stage, these are highly innovative companies that, provide a really compelling, or something like that to a strategic buyer. So,
what is the thinking that goes around that? How do you set them up for saying, okay, our exits, we need to see an exit in 3 years. These are the companies that we think you would be interested in purchasing you.
Yeah. From a fund our size, we're a small fund, right? So from a fund our size, our customer, if we think about it from the VC standpoint, our customer are larger private equity firms. That might be a highly reputable firm.
Well, let me ask you about that. What size? Like a $1 billion fund, or a $3 billion fund, or $5 billion, or what?
Yeah, I mean, $1 billion plus, definitely. But ultimately, I mean, what we want to set our companies up to do is to get to a highly credible Series B investor, right? We're not a large enough fund to take them there, but we want to set them up to be attractive so that we've got the growth profile, we've got the financial profile, we've got the innovation, we've got the customers and things like that that can set them up to go do a Series B, or the really strong VC that can then help take them to that strategic buyer or the financial buyer. That's really what we're looking at. I mean, so it's like that's what we really try to set them up to, is just the next stage of growth, right? So if we're investing at $1 million, what we're looking at is how do we help you get to 8 to 10 million in revenue, or right, and do that in a way that it's sustainable growth. You've got the right profile, and good things are going to happen as a result of that.
What's your thesis or mandates around profitability when you're doing that? Are you still, hey, we need to see 20%, what? Or it's okay that you're not profitable, we just need growth?
Yeah,
because I've been in that VC world, and we raised some money for Turbo Squid, and I remember saying, hey, don't worry about profitability. Really? When I first heard that.
That's strange, man. It cycles all over the place, right? And I think there was a time not long ago, right, where you go through these stages. VC is so like, I don't know, it's schizophrenic. One day profitability, don't worry about profitability, just burn. And other days, no, you got to get the thing profitable. I think because we're investing at the seed and Series A, early Series A level, we're okay with companies burning. We definitely don't want to see an unsustainable burn. What we tend to look at is what does your runway look like, and we want to see 18 to 24 month runways. So we want sustainable burn that they can quickly grow into or grow out of if we need to do it. So we're okay if they're burning like, on a burn ratio standpoint, if they're burning like 0.5, maybe even if they're growing fast, maybe even 1 times, right? So in other words, if they've got $1 million in ARR that they're burning, if they're burning $500,000 or $1 million on the bottom, that's probably okay. Like $500,000 better than $1 million for sure. We're not an investor that's going to be burning, it's going to have the 3x, 4x burn profile like that. That's not, there are places for that, but that's not us.
If anybody's, watching has ever been through that, where the runway starts getting shorter and shorter, and you just level of panic and everybody just goes up.
It's terrifying, right? Yeah. It's just, and I've been on that side of it, right? Where you can't operate. You can't make good decisions.
You don't. It's out of anxiety. It's like out of fear. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Have you ever, let me ask you, have you ever repeated any of your strategies that you learned through your growth and Outmatch? Hey, there's an offline, slow-growing competitor, 5x our size. Let's go buy him. Have you? In
the fund?
Yeah. Or that you recommend to some of your companies in your portfolio? Yes.
Yeah. I have not had, nobody's done it yet. I've had a couple conversations with companies where it's looked like, hey, there's a kind of an interesting play here. We are absolutely not averse to it. Hasn't happened yet, but like I said, I'm a big fan of inorganic growth when done strategically, not just going to buy anybody at any price, but tuck-in acquisitions, even at a small stage, can make a big difference. We haven't executed it yet, but we've had a couple situations where it's starting to look like it may come together. I've got one right now where in our portfolio where they've got a really interesting opportunity to go buy a very complementary product and pick up a bunch of customers, and the value looks right on it. Similar kind of situation where it's more of a services model that they can incorporate into their tech platform. We may have one looming here. We'll see what happens. But
I'm going to ask you, kind of look in the future, because that's what you do. That's what VCs actually kind of do. And I've read Brad Jacobs' books. I've read a couple other sources that said, and I'll just give you an example, that AI is going to replace, QuickBooks. Why would we even have that? So what are you looking at for HR software to replace and just change our the way we work? Trends. I'm asking you to kind of put some bets on some trends.
Yeah. I mean, within the AI's application on work is going to be enormous. And we see it the way that we hire, the way that we the way that we recruit talent, the way that we manage talent. I think if you look at it from, from a broad standpoint, I think the biggest areas you're going to see is just in the way that just the day-to-day way that people do their jobs, right, is going to change so fundamentally. So a lot of the systems that you see today that are the big CRMs or the big, HRIS systems that exist, like, to your point on QuickBooks, you're not going to need, the analysis is already going to be there and things like that, right? So, I mean, I think where we tend to look at it, the bets that we're really making today are around upskilling, reskilling, freelance gig, because I'm not trying to figure out necessarily what the next thing to get automated out of existence is. What I'm trying to figure out is how do we provide technologies or ways to keep the global workforce with the skills that they need, right? The skills of work that we think about that an individual needs to work today are changing so dramatically and so fast. We've never seen anything like it. And, the skills, say, that somebody needs on like a factory floor are going to radically be different than they need, than in just a couple of years from now than they have today. So a lot of the bets that we're really excited about right now are around how do you upskill and reskill the global workforce. We just did an acquisition, or not an acquisition, I'm sorry, an investment in a company called OneRange. Really interesting company that is exactly what they do. It's a marketplace of services, learning and development support that an individual can tie into to very rapidly change their skills, right? And upgrade their skills to be able to be more competitive. So, that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at today is how are we a part of that? How are our companies a part of that changing nature of work, right? And that's upskilling the workforce, it's reskilling the workforce, and it's the freelance gig economy, which more and more of, the interesting thing is over the next couple of years, the United States is going to have more freelance workers than FTEs, than W-2 workers.
Yeah, despite what California wants to do, there's going to be more gig workers. Yeah,
California's not going to be able to stop this, right? I mean, it's so crazy that California, it's so the opposite, right, of the way that the world is going, because there's going to be more when you hit that tipping point. And again, it's scary in one perspective, but it's also exciting from an investor perspective, because what happens? Just think about the dynamics that start to occur when more people are self-employed than have a W-2. Well, what about healthcare? What about benefits? What about job security? What about getting a mortgage? Right?
All of that, like huge marketplaces, all of that. That's the way it's going. Yeah.
Massive disruption. So to answer that's a really long answer to your question, John, of like, where are we? That's the stuff that we're looking at, right? What is this? What's going to happen?
The way you said that,
where do we invest?
That's the way you said it. There's going to be more gig workers than W-2s.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the trend. So as an investor, what I want to do is invest in those trends. We know that that's a trend, right? We know that is going to happen. So what are the bets that need to be made in terms of the way that people get mortgages, or the way that they get benefits, or the way that, like, all of these things that are going to have to happen because of that trend, in that bet in more people. And it's not even a bet. I mean, it's a give it, right? More people will be, unless the entire country decided to go the way of what California is trying to do, right? And slow it down, but it's not going to happen. So that's a huge area, right? So that's a huge bet that we're looking at. The other bet is the globalization of the workforce. We can recruit talent today, not we're not limited to, not only are we limited to W-2s, we're also not limited by any geographic barriers anymore either. And that's that's part of that shift to freelance, but it's also part of the shift to a global talent base. Where are the investments? How do we start to invest behind that?
Yeah. You see that Nick Huber, I don't know if you know Nick Huber, he does storage facilities. He bought Support Shepherd, which is a marketplace of workers down in South America. Yeah. Only because he didn't buy, he goes, hey, I'm a tech guy, I'm looking for opportunities. He looked at his P&L and his expenses, this is what I'm hiring these people to do. I'm going to invest in my P&L.
Yep. I'm looking at a deal right now. It's exactly the same. Different business, but same premise, right? Looking at a deal right now that's offshoring the work of BDRs. I'm not talking call center stuff, but offshoring like BDR work that, so much of the job of a BDR today, because of the change in technology, BDR, like business development. So and so much of there's two things that are really affecting that workforce in a really profound way, right? Number one is the shift in technology. So much of the work of a BDR today is actually just running cadence programs, like running outreach programs to just keep pinging buyers and, automated email sequences and stuff like that. They end up spending 90% of their time just running automated.
It's also like staying in front of everybody's mind with social media, just like having posts on X or having on LinkedIn, whatever it is, just like constantly.
Personal branding and things like that, right? So all of that stuff. But what it means is BDRs are spending less and less on the phone, less and less time on a Zoom call or a phone with a prospect and doing what BDRs need to be doing, which is qualifying opportunities, right? So looking at a deal right now based out of India to actually offshore a lot of that work. It's not an Indian call center. They're not dialing into those prospects. We're offloading a lot of that back end work so that the LinkedIn, the LinkedIn outreach is getting done, the email outreach is getting done, all this stuff, and basically teeing up qualified conversations so that BDRs can spend more time on the phone doing what we want them to be doing. You have less BDRs, so there's a huge cost arbitrage there, and they're spending the time on those calls doing the actual deal qualification. We'll outsource all of that back end. Same thing as like what, same kind of concept as what Nick is talking about. But those are the kind of bets that we're looking at, because that stuff is going to revolutionize the way that people work.
Interesting. Well, Greg, I appreciate it, man. This is like an interesting talk. You went from buying a company that was 5 times your size to now placing VC bets or money on gig workers being more plentiful than W-2 workers.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, look, it's all work, right? And the company that we did all the M&A. That was the space that we were in, right? So we were doing all this M&A, but it was always within this future of work space. That's how we got to know it. But there's nowhere today that is more disrupted. There is no part of society that is more disrupted today than the way that will be disrupted in the way that we work. It will not look anything like the careers that you and I have at, John. And
I can't fathom. There's a couple things. Like, one is that I drive my kids to high school and I drive by University of Arizona every day. So we see these kids spending $30,000 to $50,000 a year on education. I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
And then I just don't see anybody working for a company for 30 years like you used to do at IBM, as an example.
No.
Yeah.
No, and that's it, because you can develop, one of the things that is so interesting to me. So I had a conversation with a guy, freelancer, team we do our social media with, right? Comes from Kosovo, comes to the US, gets an MBA, looks at a bunch of jobs in the US, says, hey, I understand this kind of change in social media, personal branding and stuff, goes back to Kosovo and starts this company doing social media, SEO, PPC, that kind of thing in Kosovo for US tech companies. Just think about, we talk about arbitrage and M&A standpoint, think about the arbitrage there. You are now operating a business on Kosovo level
Economics.
expenses.
Yeah.
Selling into the U.S. market. These businesses just explode in growth because they're able to do it really well. These are, U.S. or Western educated individuals, although that difference doesn't even matter anymore, right? And they're able to get U.S. dollars and build these companies. And it's extraordinary what you see happen. And I think that my daughter just graduated with her MBA last week. You look at like even her cohorts in her MBA program and stuff. Entrepreneurship as a viable means of the barrier to entry is so low now. You can go out, you can graduate with your MBA and, start a business or
buy a business.
MBA and start a business.
Or buy a business.
Buy a business, right.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Greg Moran, we're out of time, and I really appreciate you being on my show.
A lot of fun, John. Good to see you. Maybe we'll connect in Plattsburgh, New York sometime. So
I'm not going up in there in December. No thanks.
That's right. For anybody listening, Plattsburgh State University of New York, Plattsburgh. It's an awesome school. You just have to like cold weather.
Yeah.
But if you can get beyond that, great school.